Ambassador Bolton, you've spent countless hours with President Trump down there in the White House, in the Oval Office, discussing foreign policy. So what does he really think of NATO? Does he really believe that NATO is obsolete?
Well, I don't think he fundamentally understands NATO. I don't think he understands the concept of a collective defense organization. He has a very simple-minded view of what it involves. He thinks, basically, the United States defends Europe, and Europe doesn't pay for it. He doesn't understand that a well-functioning alliance like NATO enhances the security of all the alliance members. Certainly, 99% of Americans would say Europeans should pay more for their defense expenditures. But Trump goes after the defense expenditures as a way to criticize NATO, and I think, unfortunately, if he wins, ultimately to withdraw the United States.
You think he would do that?
Yes, he came very close to it in his first term, and I think he would try and do it here as well.
Do you think he would do it because of some alliance, some hidden agenda with Russia, maybe even?
No, I think his objection is based on a number of different things. He always used to couple what he considered unfair trade arrangements between the United States and the European Union. Back in the day, he criticized Germany, especially for reliance on the Nord Stream natural gas pipeline, saying, why are you paying billions of dollars to the country that we're supposed to be defending you against? But each criticism could be answered in turn, but his fundamental point is he just doesn't understand alliances. He's very transactional, very episodic, very ad hoc. He doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't do policy as we conventionally understand that. He looks at everything as a deal.
As you mentioned, the deals, the defense expenditures, Trump has said that every NATO member that doesn't pay its fair share, Putin can do whatever he wants. Does that mean that Article 5 of the NATO treaty that says that there's a mutual assistance in case of attack, that it's actually dead when Trump comes back into the office?
If he carries through on that, some of his advisors have offered a plan in the past few weeks saying, well, we wouldn't defend countries that didn't spend 2% of their GDP on defense. That's impossible to implement. If U.S. forces were in Poland and attacked by the Russians, and Polish and U.S. forces were driven back to the Polish-German border, would the American commander have to call his Russian counterpart and say, we need a 24-hour ceasefire because we can't defend Germany, we'll see at the French border? It just doesn't work. The alliance would collapse if you tried that kind of approach. And it's a demonstration of the lack of seriousness of the way Trump treats the alliance because he doesn't understand it.
As you mentioned, the scenario of a possible attack of Russia against the NATO membership, do you think it's even possible? So would Putin really test NATO?
Well, I don't think it's imminent, but I do think Putin gave us a long-range warning back in 2005 when he said to the State Duma that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. The next year at the Munich Security Conference, he basically laid out his plan to recreate the Russian Empire, not the Soviet Union, not a Marxist state, but the Russian Empire. That has to include Ukraine and Belarus, I think, in his view, and I think he's got plenty of other pieces of the Russian Empire to go after. I think what that means in the foreseeable future is the NATO countries that are potentially in most jeopardy are the Baltic republics.
Let's talk about Ukraine now. Do you believe that the decision of NATO to say the future of Ukraine lies in NATO would be valid if Trump gets the presidency again? Would Trump support a Ukraine membership in NATO?
I don't think so. And I think efforts, if I may say, to Trump-proof NATO that some European governments talk about are a big mistake. It's not going to make Trump any friendlier toward NATO. I think the main thing is to remember the historical mistake that was made when George W. Bush proposed bringing Ukraine and Georgia into NATO on a fast track in 2008. And key allies, Germany and France, objected. I think if Ukraine had come into NATO then, we wouldn't have seen the 2014 invasion. We wouldn't have seen the 2022 invasion. I think that's proven by the decisions of Finland and Sweden after all these years to join NATO because they finally concluded that the only safe defense was behind the NATO border.
The day before the NATO summit here in D.C. began, Putin bombed a children's hospital in Ukraine. Do you think that was a diabolic way of showing NATO that they can't stop him?
Well, I think Putin couldn't care less about carefully targeting Russian munitions. He's tried to destroy the Ukrainian energy infrastructure, among other things. It's a form of asymmetric warfare against civilian targets in Ukraine because the Russian military is performing so badly and has performed so badly over 2 years. I think Putin feels in a very strong position now, and I think he thinks when Trump takes office, if he's reelected, he'll be in an even stronger position.
Mm-hmm. What is your expectation for this NATO summit here?
Well, I think it's important for people to look back on the history and remember and make the argument that the United States didn't create NATO out of the goodness of our heart. Because we're good people, although we are. We created it to make the United States a safer place, and it succeeded. And the only time that Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty has been invoked is when we were attacked on 9/11. That's the case that needs to be made to the American people. It's true, every other member of NATO is safer because of NATO, but so are we.
Yeah. So in Germany, everybody's wondering if Trump comes back, how to deal with him. What will be your advice for the German government?
Well, it won't be easy. Let's start right there. But I thought the foreign leader who dealt with Trump most effectively in the first term was Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan. He had very important Japanese national security interests, the threat from a nuclear North Korea, the threat from China, and he was very persistent in finding every opportunity to speak with Donald Trump in person, over the phone, and not to ask him for things every conversation, but just to keep talking to him, to keep repeating the Japanese position. And I think he had considerable success. It takes a lot of time. A chancellor's day is full as it is, but the reality is the more time you spend talking to Donald Trump, the better the chances. And so that would be my recommendation.
In his first term, Trump made many hostile comments towards Germany, towards Angela Merkel. What is the explanation for that? Why is Trump so hostile towards Germany? What do you think?
You know, it's I'm not a psychiatrist, and I can't read. His father was German, so that it doesn't help with that. I do think he had trouble dealing with women leaders. He didn't have a great relationship with Prime Minister Theresa May of the United Kingdom, and I think that's just part of the Trump makeup. If Chancellor Scholz or whomever succeeds him plays golf, that would be a plus. That's Shinzo Abe did that all the time. He's not a person you deal with as you would other American presidents. As I said before, he doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't think in policy terms, and you have to take that into account.
Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for your time.